Well, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm talking about is a joint initiative, which is ETNO and WWF initiative. And before that, I have to mention something about the background. As an NGO and a business association started a project together, some points of the goal of this initiative, and the roadmap, which was mentioned before, and its content. After that, something about the European Union and its approach, and the ICT and climate change actors in the world nowadays, and some difficulties. So about the background, WWF was born in 1961, so it's a kind of old organization for the moment. And they changed their name in 1986, while ETNO, the European Telecommunication Network Operators Association, was born in 1992. In 1996, after a Euroscom project, this association, ETNO, has launched the Environmental Charter and started a working group, an environmental working group. In 2002, the two organizations started something very similar. ETNO started a project on the ICT's effect on climate change, and WWF has reported the Sustainability at the Speed of Light report. In 2004, there was a conference in Budapest. That was the first European conference on telecommunications and sustainability, where WWF has presented some requests to the ICT sector, and that was about that they would like to see figures, because everybody is talking about the potentials of ICT and sustainable development, but they could not see any figures. And surprise, surprise, ETNO has published the first results and figures about ICT and climate change. So since then, in 2005, we started a joint initiative called Saving the Climate at the Speed of Light, and in 2006, we published our roadmap together. About the goals, first goal is that ICT is recognized as an important part of the solution for combating climate change in Europe. I think in worldwide we are kind of approaching. The second is that key actors have a climate change strategy for ICT, more or less completed. But the third one, that concrete ICT climate change programs are initiated in Europe by 2007, is kind of late. We are. So maybe we were too optimistic that time. About the roadmap, the preface was written by Margot Wallström, the Vice President of the Commission, and it has two main chapters. The first is about the opportunity of ICT services to reduce CO2 emission, and the second was detailing the kind of e-strategy for CO2 reductions in Europe. We have to talk about the basis of the results as well. The essential information is coming from the ETNO Sustainability Working Group and from companies. So companies had researches before, which we used for this roadmap. The researches of the report of the services, video conference numbers and figures are based on Deutsche Telekom and Potsdam Institute common research. The audio conference figures are based on British Telecom and Sustain IT common research. FlexiWork is also British Telecom and Sustal research, and virtual answering machine is about Deutsche Telekom and Öko-Institute, online billing based on Deutsche Telekom Öko-Institute, and web-based taxation, here comes e-governance, Magyar Telecom and Pannon University common research. So what you can see here, that all the services we were focusing on are existing services. We didn't try to find new services, as we didn't have any experience, didn't have any researches behind. And what are the other bases of the results? We have to see, and we say it every time, that to see the direct effect of ICT is easy to measure. How much do we consume? How much CO2 emissions are arising from production? But the impact is pretty small. The indirect effect has a significant impact, but it's hard to measure. And the systemic effect is where the very big impact we can see, but many theories are behind and no researches. So what we found there in the roadmap and after the research is that 50 million tons of CO2 per year could be replaced with ICT in the European Union. And for that, the new and more efficient meeting culture, so travel replacement basically, could replace 24 million tons of CO2 per year. How? It's based on video conference searches, so if 20% of the business travels, and only business travels we are talking about, would be replaced with video conference, then 22 million tons of CO2 could be replaced. In case of audio conference, if only 50% of the employees in the European Union would use only once upon a time, once a year, an audio conference instead of a meeting, then 2.1 million tons of CO2 could be replaced. And of course, there are other areas like telemonitoring, teleeducation, telemedicine, telecare, teleassistance, so many other services which are not researched yet. The second, oops, I don't want to send it. Oops. ICT? Ah, okay, it's probably because of the ghost. Sorry. So the second, to come back to this 50 million tons of CO2, is basically about an e-based dematerialization. Based on these services, we found 4 million tons of CO2 per year which could be replaced using virtual answering machine, online billing system. In online billing system, we only talked about the phone bills and web taxation, which is driving to e-governance, basically. Here, the number is not too big. As you can see, it's only 4 million tons. But there are other areas which I believe that there are much more potential, like video on demand and music on demand services, iTunes, what young people are already using, electronic paper, paperless offices, and e-governance again. Okay, I think there was one missing. Okay, thank you. And the third part, how to reach these 50 million tons of CO2, is a sustainable community, or as we call it, city planning or combined measures. Here we found 22 million tons of CO2 per year could be replaced, and a very easy way to do that is FlexiWork, which is based on British Telecom's studies from before. If 10% of the employees in the European Union would FlexiWork, which doesn't mean that every day they have to stay at home. It only means that one day, 2 days, or they just start to work later on a day, then 22 million tons of CO2 could be replaced. And the other areas here, like e-commerce, the intelligent building someone talked about yesterday, intelligent shopping, and so on. The other side, which is always mentioned and which was also mentioned many times when we started the project, is the direct effect of ICT. Well, already we know from Ericsson's study, I think, that this 2%, that the ICT sector is responsible for the 2% of CO2 emission, and there is the 98% where we have the opportunity. What we saw is that based on ETNO companies' information, only with 6 services which we used, we could replace more than around 50 million tons of CO2, while 17 network operators' emission was less than 5 million tons of CO2 at this time. So for that, to reach the 50 million tons of CO2 reduction, with ICT by 2010, there must be a policy revision, like the energy policy, the tax policies, public procurement, etc. And also supplementary parallel actions are needed. But this is basically for a Europe, this roadmap. For the second step to reach in the roadmap is climate change targets for 2020, and for that further researches are needed. Possible focus areas we mentioned, they are sustainable consumption, for example, like further e-dematerialization studies, indirect effect on sustainable consumption by information when I know how much the CO2 emission is of a product, and then I don't buy it, or I can choose at least. The sustainable production, as production on demand, converging technologies, decentralized production, and sustainable community. And about the EU, as the roadmap was published in 2006, and the preface was written by Margot Wallström, for a long time what we did in the project was kind of roadshow. And we tried to push, or at least convince many actors to do something. So what happened is that European Business Summit has been held in February this year, where Viviane Reding already mentioned that she's going to have a kind of ICT climate change strategy. And on May 13, the press release has been published by the Commission, where the Commission casts ICT in a green role. And the focusing areas first are energy generation and distribution, the buildings, and the lighting. And they are trying to find partnerships where first they are focusing on the cities. Some other actors, as I told already, ETNO started this project in 2002, published a project study in 2005, later on this roadmap in 2006. Also, GESI, Globally Sustainability Initiative, is going to publish a study written together with McKinsey. HP also started a project on ICT and climate change. They have published already from coal power plants to smart buildings at the speed of light. This project is joint initiative also together with WWF. And also an outline for the first global IT strategy for CO2 reductions is published just a couple of weeks ago. And here already they are talking about 1 billion tons of CO2 emission could be replaced with ICT. EICTA has also a publication, High Tech Low Carbon, this year. And the European Commission, as I already said, has just published the communication in May. What are the difficulties? The difficulty, it's kind of personal opinion of mine, that there are many actors in the ICT nowadays, as you could see, but there is missing one voice. Everybody is telling different results, but not the whole ICT sector is saying one thing. Also, a difficulty is that ICT as a tool in climate protection needs complex way of thinking. So when you are talking about climate change, all people are associating on renewable energies, etc. But when you try to explain that ICT can help, then there will be a kind of confusion. Another difficulty might be that the real potentials relate to other sectors like energy sector, transport, etc. And as it's not easy to understand these figures and the potentials, it's not easy to make a marketing on it, to make everybody to understand it. And also there is a kind of difficulties that since 2006, 2008, there were 2 years which we had to wait, so I have to say there is a slow acting policy. Well, thank you very much for your attention.